Hello and welcome to this special edition of the Madaxeman Army List podcast, in which we give you the hottest of hot takes on one of the brand new, completely new lists in version 4, the Taifa kingdoms, the Arab kingdoms of Spain, just sort of prior to or during the Reconquista. This podcast was recorded before the V4 came out. We were given special privilege to look at this list, so some of it we're talking about rules and troop types, we're not entirely sure what they are, but by now version 4 should be in your sticky little hands and you should be able to check out this list as well. So sit back, pin back your ears and listen to our first review of one of the brand new lists.
This means war.
Well, welcome to the first ever, probably the first ever in the world, on account of we're the only people who do it anyway, ADLG version 4 list-specific podcast. And I'm joined here by Richard and Dave, the regular team, as we start our violent flicking through the version 4 book, which I'm sure everybody is doing as we speak. And we've actually been gifted to allow us to record this slightly early, a sneak preview of one of the lists. So this is how you get this so soon. And the list that we were looking at is one of there's a number of new lists. It's gone up from about 280 to 300 in total. And this week we're looking at the Taifa kingdoms, which is a sort of separating out of the kind of feudal medieval Spanish thing. Clearly there's quite a number of players. ADLG is very big in Spain, and I've no doubt at all that their influence and input suggested some of these lists and getting a bit more specific. It's a really interesting period of history, of military mix. You've got Western Knights, you've got Arab troops in the Iberian Peninsula, and you've got all these different competing kingdoms in this, what is list number 204, I think, the Taifa kingdoms list. And I don't, we tend to, as always, start with a bit of the history of this one. This one goes from 1032 to 1172. It has El Cid leading 3 different cities as well. But I think maybe first, sort of, Dave, you've used these sort of medievally, feudally Spanish armies quite a lot. This period of history, is there, what was going on? What's your background research and reading or trips to Spain shown you about this period?
I think this is an interesting new list. It's a good idea that they've added it in. We're dealing with this list with the Arab kingdoms of Spain, as opposed to the Spanish kingdoms of Spain.
Yep. In
the north of Spain, the Reconquista, the early period. This is the early period of the Reconquista, El Cid. So you've got 3 or 4 states, Spanish states in the north: Leon,
Navarre,
yes, Castile,
Asturias.
Yeah, Asturias, yeah. So those are the Spanish ones, who are as much at war with each other as they are with anybody else. They finally get themselves together under the Cid, the Lord, and then they take on the southern Arab states. These are the Arab states this list covers, and they're as much as war with each other as they are with the Spanish. So it's a continuation. It's after the Arab conquest. Things have calmed down. So we're talking about Andalusia. Zaragoza is further to the north. Zaragoza is in a constant state of war with Leon and things like that, which is very much covered in all the movies, I think, and all that.
Yeah.
And of course, Tim, we've been to a few of these castles.
Yeah, we did a road trip and drove. There's kind of the route of El Cid across what seems like most of northern Spain and La Rioja and those regions between the northern coast and Madrid. So I think we stopped in 2 or 3 castles that claimed to be the home of El Cid, or were the home of El Cid, and certainly a couple of villages as well, where there were plaques on the walls and it was on the route of El Cid, that I suspect you could follow around Spain for several years, given he seems to have been out and about. But I don't know, Richard, what about you? I think when we were chatting earlier, you were mentioning that there's been some interesting stuff that's come out relatively recently, possibly even in Slingshot, about this period of history.
Yeah, there was a good sort of, I think, 4 or 5 articles 3 or 4 years ago covering the sort of medieval history of Spain. From memory, it was from about 400 with the arrival of the Visigoths and the Vandals on through then the Arab conquest of Spain and then the Reconquista by the Christian kingdoms of the north. I think this list does add a lot of granularity to what was the sort of the some of the Islamic Spanish list, I think the Andalusian one, because it covers this period after the collapse of the Cordoba Caliphate, when Islamic Spain was under a single state. And it covers it. So you've got these 33 initially independent Taifas, sub-kingdoms, and then you get these waves of Berbers coming in and being asked in or coming in and involving themselves in Spanish politics, which are covered by the Berber lists, the Almoravids and so on. So in the movie, this is the kind of more effete Islamic states, the ones who were all dressed in the silks, as opposed to the sort of more Spartan-looking black or white-clad Berber tribesmen. And so you get a nice mix of troops, as we'll come into detail later. But you've got the sort of and the Islamicized Spaniards, the Andalusians, providing spearmen and some cavalry, and you've got a lot of mercenaries, both Christian and Islamic. So it allows you to do a lot of variety. And El Cid fights for both sides and himself eventually as he becomes a warlord. So it's a fascinating situation for a campaign because you've got so much backstabbing and side changing going on.
No, I think it is good to. It's one of these things where you look at a wargaming list and it kind of reshapes your view of history, because the view of that sort of stylized view of the Reconquista of all the Christian forces pushing all the Islamic armies and peoples further south and eventually turfing them out in kind of 1450 or something like that. This really brings home that actually at this period of history, even the concept of nation states was kind of a nonsense in loads of Europe. These were proper feudal bloke in a castle of whichever religion and controlling the surrounding countryside and kind of stretching out and all paying, well, say after the fall of the Cordoba Caliphate, not even really paying tribute to anybody. They became sort of independent. They were princes and kings in their own right.
Yes, and it was then, as tends to happen, it's the same as happened in the British Isles. It splinters into many, many small kingdoms after the collapse of the Roman Empire. And then slowly somebody starts putting the pieces back together again. I think why this particular list is so fascinating is the personality of El Cid himself that we were discussing earlier. I don't know it hugely, but my sense as a Brit is that he's kind of Arthur and Robin Hood all rolled into one. He is this great legendary figure of Spanish medieval times, a great hero, and although as always he's perhaps a more historically attested figure, there's a lot of legends that surround him as well. And with the great movie, and I remember there was I think a wonderful reenactment war game at Salute many years ago with loads of 28mm figures. So it is a very colourful, exciting period, and I look forward to seeing more Taifa armies on a war games table.
No, I think that could be it. And well, look, let's have a look. Let's just have a chat about the list generally before we dive into our specific list. Then
This means war.
So look, we've got the list up on screen here, and Taifa Kingdoms 204 starts in 1032, runs to 1172. So it's a reasonably tight time period. You're not getting into heavy knights by the end of it, which gives it its own unique flavour. El Cid can be strategist for three different years or sets of years, for Seville, for Zaragoza, and Valencia as well. And it also covers Murcia as a Taifa kingdom, and they're also calling on the Almoravid Berbers. They're calling on Christian mercenaries. So I don't know, Dave, do you want to kind of run us down? Start by running us down the list of what the key components are, what the compulsories are, things like that.
Well, I think the specific thing which is important, comparing it to previous feudal Spanish and what we might expect to see in the later ones, is you've got a more limited supply of knights. It seems to me that's a very good thing. I like it. It's very historical. It's very specific. I think it's saying that the Seville, Zaragoza, Valencia are using Christian knights. So obviously, they're Spanish, as you say, as opposed to Arab. Whereas
it's 0 to 4, isn't it? Which is an interesting. Yeah. That's enough to cause trouble, but not enough to be a knight list, isn't it? You've got to support it with something else. You can't just go for the old, I'll just throw a shed load of knights at people.
Yeah, and I think the other one is the Taifa of Murcia, which is a slightly different one. And I think this is what they're reflecting, and I think I've heard of this. There were some Arabs who sort of became knights, not in the Christian sort of. They fought as knights in a sort of their own sort of manner. The knights were very different shaped shields. They were less heavily armoured as the other feudal knights of Northern Europe, which reflected the method of warfare in that sense. Love to see a figure made specifically for that. That would be really good. I think the other thing which is noticeable is that these are armies where you've got a fair number of compulsory spearmen.
You've got a couple in all of those Taifas have a couple of compulsory spearmen, don't they?
Yeah, I think there's more spearmen involved. And we've got a new troop type in the Berber medium cavalry javelin, which we'll have to see what the rules. I mean, I can imagine that's going to allow evading, some shooting. It's going to be an interesting change. That's going to be a good one.
And then in the Taifa of Murcia list, we've got another new troop type, which is medium spearman impact.
Yes.
Yeah, that's with the Almogavars. I'm guessing that medium spearman impact could be. It just smells to me like it might be something that's very specific to the Almogavars, because they, if we look on the meta level, you've got players in Spain talking about the uniqueness of Spanish armies, and Almogavars to me feel like almost like one of those types like English longbowmen. They're a sort of semi-unique troop type. They were especially good in period, especially aggressive, but equally they were spearmen. So having medium spearman impact, I wonder if there will be many more medium spearman impact once we're all flicking through the book furiously to find them than just the Almogavars.
Yeah, there may not be many more, but they do appear in about half a dozen lists. So
I think Almogavars will be, but I wonder if that troop type classification will be used for many other people.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine, isn't it? That, as you say, they're a bit like back in the day Cretan archers or Balearic slingers. They are so good of their type that they get other troops that are similar to them get described as them simply because they come to define a new category as English longbowmen, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, all those Highlander and what's the other one? The Ottoman archers, isn't it? The bow swordsmen, the Janissaries.
Janissaries, yeah.
It might just be a new type that's medium spearman impact. It might be medium spearman with impact. We'll find out. We will know by the time this podcast hits the thing. So just looking through it though, you've got all these lists have got a limited number of knights, up to 4 in the most of the Taifas, up to 6 with Murcia as well. They've all got some compulsory spearmen, a couple of compulsory spearmen. The normal Taifas can add support, which by the time we're recording this, we know is a bit better. as well, in that it cancels furious charge, and it also isn't stopped by heavy armor now, which I guess is nice. That makes support feel like it's worth taking, particularly with possibly even with a downgrade to mediocre for some of them spearmen as well. Looking at the rest of it, though, there's almost a complete mix of every medieval troop type there, isn't there? You've got heavy cavalry impact, medium cavalry impact, light cavalry javelin. There's compulsory 4 actually of either light cavalry javelin or medium cavalry javelin that perhaps means that, you know, that ADLG thing that we all have to occasionally unlearn previous lists and try to remember that light horse and medium horse is a continuum in ADLG. They're not that different, but maybe the medium cavalry javelin makes that continuum a bit more even in some ways. But with 4 light cavalry javelin or medium cavalry javelin, you've got some options there. You've got some medium spearmen, you've got crossbowmen, you've got archers. Some can be downgraded to mediocre. A fortified camp, and then a couple of these Almugavars, the medium spearman impact, and then some medium swordsmen, former slaves from Valencia in the Mercian list, who now are cheaper. They're at 6 points each. They're a point cheaper than they would have been in version 3, but with only 2 being allowed, it's not going to massively unbalance the list, I imagine, or unbalance things. So it's just an interesting combination of different troop types in there that I suppose the only thing that's really missing is there's not any mounted horse archers, but I guess that wasn't really a feature of the period.
There are 2 light cavalry bow because they were mercenaries or slaves bought from Turkey, but they weren't big in
mounted archery,
in Spanish warfare. There just weren't the numbers.
This is just all about getting stuck in then.
But I do think your comment on light to medium is spot on in that there's more and more evidence that in a lot of, particularly the step type armies, the units would sort of morph. You know, they would perhaps be in a block and then send 100 men forward to skirmish and then fall back on the block and then to melee at a later time. So I think this new category of medium cavalry javelin, if it also applies to people like the Numidians and so on, will perhaps give us a more interesting representation of some of the capabilities of those armies.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be it is going to be a fascinating one, isn't it? Well, maybe that's the point at which we move on and have a look at some of the lists that we've conjured up.
This means war.
So then, first of our 3 lists, and Richard, you're up first on this one for our first version 4 200-point list. And run us through it. You've got 25 units. You've got your initiative up to 3. I'm looking. There's a strategist, so Cid's there, which presumably means it's not Mercia. That's the one.
No,
he doesn't do that.
I've gone for the Valencia period, sort of 1095, when El Cid is for the first time sort of ruling as an independent lord rather than serving somebody else. And 2 reasons I was attracted to it. A, I just like El Cid as a character. And B, it's the fact that that's the only way you get to have the knights as impact rather than impetuous. So I basically started with that idea. So command 1 is 4 elite impact knights with an included unreliable general. I would prefer not to have him. There's a couple of places where I've done things to try and have a larger army, making that their commander unreliable is one, with one of the Berber horsemen, either to be a screen or to go wide or to get behind people. Whatever, would probably, depending on the terrain, they could either be in the middle of the table or on one edge. If they were on one edge, I'd have them in front of the camp, simply because that increases the chance of your opponent having to trigger them at some point. rather than having them stuck way out, on away from camps, because there's a danger if you do that and they go unreliable that they never get in the game.
Yeah, that's quite a lot of your strike capability, isn't it? In that command, you do want that triggered, so that does sort of tend. But I guess it's there's so many moving parts in this army, and they still have that ability, especially as they're all drilled impact. They're not impetuous. You've not gone the impetuous option. They can get somewhere once they get going fairly quickly.
Exactly, and by taking a strategist as the CNC, you've always got that option to put, if they do go unreliable, you've got the chance to throw them the extra 2 pips to bump up their odds of rolling a 5 rather than just 6 to come reliable.
Yeah.
So then the other 2 commands are there partly to support that tip of the spear, but with enough capability that they can't just be skirmished out of the game. So the next command has a competent general, and it's got a mixture of rough terrain troops, so 2 medium spearmen, a javelinman, a crossbowman, and a bowman, with 1 light infantry bow. So that's 5 or 6 wide. So that should be able to fill any piece of rough terrain that's around. The javelinman there, so that if you do face elephants, one of the great things about Spanish lists is being able to have knights and javelinmen. So I wanted to have that there. And then having the 2 medium cavalry impact and a light cavalry javelin means that initially you can deploy those behind the infantry, and then depending on the situation, either swing them left or right of the infantry, because while they're not that strong in themselves, they're very nasty on somebody's flank. So that's almost
not a bad little, with the impact as well. You've got quite a lot of first round punch, haven't you? To support, and coming in to support the knights on either side, depending on how you deploy them, that really does help.
Exactly. Being medium, the foot can all keep up with the knights. If there's a bit of rough terrain, the knights can hang back. If they're facing, say, 6 impetuous knights of the opponents, they can hang back, and the mediums or the medium cavalry impact can threaten to hit the flanks of the impetuous knights or the pikemen or whatever that the knights don't want to face. And then on the other wing, we've got El Cid in charge, and I've taken
11 people. That's huge.
Yeah. So you want a strategist in charge, probably mainly operating as 2 blocks, but I've given them the strategist so that the cavalry or the infantry can break off individual bases to play fun and games, because they're not individually that strong, but it's the overall mass, because the unit as a whole has 25. So 4 heavy spearmen with missile support, they are mediocre, but the idea is that there's enough of them and they're tough enough that if somebody attacks them, they should hang around for a while. They're probably not going to be super aggressive, but they're strong enough to march up into somebody's face and pin a chunk of their frontage. Then there's...
I must admit, I'm very... I'm really interested in how this improved missile support that is suddenly worth taking. Because it was overpointed last time and just wasn't really worth it. But turning mediocre troops, giving them a pretty much a guaranteed +1 against, it sounds like almost everything in the first turn, really pushes that, as you say, they're there to survive and take a long time to be killed at worst and possibly do well. But giving them that extra +1 against everybody in the first round really improves their survivability and sort of pushes them towards, they should still be sticking around at the end of the game, really, rather than falling over and being run over by a furious charge by someone.
And it is quite interesting that across history, there's a lot of armies that have mediocre spear with support, where different generals across time have said, if I stick a few archers behind these fairly grotty spearmen, it'll just toughen them up a bit. So the fact that so many people came up with the same idea says it ought to work on table as it did historically.
Yeah.
But
okay.
because they don't have much punch, I've put a couple of missile troops with them and some skirmishing. And then they've got the 3 Berber cavalry. Again, could swing left or right of that infantry, probably start them behind, just so that, you know, you've got that ability to mess with the opponent's head, while
Yes.
at the same time you're reaching down his throat with the knights and trying to kick his teeth in.
Yeah, no, which is where you find his teeth. But it's got a really unusual feel, hasn't it? I don't know. It feels very different to those generic Spanish and generic, Andalusian or whatever it was, armies that we had before. With that mix of knights is baked in rather than sort of a funny little ally or a bolt on for 1 or 2. Having 4 gives you enough grunt to almost build the army around it, but you can't build the army solely on it, if that makes sense. You've got to build it around it rather than on it.
Yes.
Which is interesting. Dave, what's your thoughts?
So the thing I've noticed about the list is, I use the feudal Spanish, medieval Spanish quite a bit. I think we're all going to be looking at 25, 26 bases, which is quite a step up from the feudal and the medieval. It's hard to get 21, 22 or 23 out of those lists. You still got to, I think one of the issues with this list in wargaming terms is you've only got a command and control of 3 points, which I agree with Richard, makes the strategist very, very interesting, especially as the strategist gives you the medium knights elite impacts, which are much more controllable. I like Richard's list. I think having the command and control with the commands 2 and 3 means you can, if you need to be, switch out those cavalry from those commands to help trigger the knights into action. You know, you could, if you're worried about the knights, something can sail round a flank to make the other person commit to bringing the knights into the game. If they go in. I think the issue that I see is in command number 2, where you've got a group of cavalry, a group of spear, and actually they're all medium, aren't they? So
yeah.
I would wonder about having it. It's a similar way that I use it. Not sure. Something in there. One thing I would say with the list is I would make the Andalusian archers mediocre and probably bump up my spearmen with it. Get 2 of the spearmen up to ordinary by making the bowmen mediocre, but that's a minor.
Yeah, I think from a game point of view, and I think it's interesting how this pans out. I with what we know about V4 as we're recording this, that medium infantry second command, you've got 6 wide, you've got 2 spearmen, you've got a javelinman, a crossbowman, a bowman, and the light infantry. 6 is a big number, but I do wonder if there will be more impact swordsmen and impetuous swordsmen around, because they, it looks like they're becoming cheaper, and whether that command, it's great for going in and beating lightly contested rough terrain because it's wide and it shoots and it does a lot of things. 4 of them shoot, but I just wonder if in a world where the meta changes and there will be a few more of these other types of impact and impetuous swordsmen, whether that does look a little bit vulnerable. But perhaps there'll be changes to medium spearmen that we haven't seen, or other things as well.
I think those are very fair criticisms. The only thing I would say against it is that's exactly why I put the impact cavalry with the mediums and
True.
the medium cavalry javelin with the heavies.
Yeah.
Because 2 impact medium cavalry stood next to them is going to make medium swordsmen crossing the open think twice.
It really is.
And while they're thinking twice, as you say, I'm chucking javelins and crossbow bolts at them.
And they're starting to erode. They're starting to be all down 1, aren't they, all the way across the board?
Exactly. So it's. I mean, at the end of the day, you can't have a perfect list unless you can have 300 points and the other guy's only allowed 200.
Exactly. No,
so you have to take risks somewhere.
It's interestingly compromised, and it really has a proper flavour of people running around in Spain, for sure.
I think we're all going to find the 3 command points, having 1 strategist, 1 competent, an orderly, or whatever, is going to give us a challenge to moving it's what will in the end become quite a large army.
No, good. Excellent. All right, let's look at the next one.
This means war.
So second list up then, in this slightly bizarre challenge of trying to compile a list where we don't fully know all the rules, and clearly the meta that we're trying to put it into doesn't really exist, but still trying to get that flavor of Taifa Kingdom list. So this one's mine. Again, I went for the Cid as well. It kind of feels like you should do, but I spread the command and control around in a different way, particularly with the Christian Knights. So, but still managed to get to 25, which is, you know, as Dave was saying, maybe this is the new thing. So what I've done, I've put the strategist, not included, of course, but in a command with 4 knights. Again, I've gone for the medium knight impact elite. I dithered with thinking, look, there's a strategist. Can I get some more points? Can I make them impetuous? But that fascinating thing about there's only 4 of them, not 6 or not 8 or 7 or whatever. I just kind of came down and thought, if you're going to have them, make them as controllable, you know, invest the extra 1 or 2 or 3, but it's actually only 1 point, isn't it, between impetuous and non-impetuous. Invest the extra 4 points in making them fully controllable, because they are going to have to be exactly where they need to be and be the right piece. And then I've supported it with the mounted component. Again, Richard, I think yours had a light cavalry javelin. I've put a light cavalry javelin in, but I've also stuck in a medium cavalry impact. And I think you were talking about your medium cavalry impact swinging over to support the knights. Because I've got a strategist here with these, I was thinking either that medium cavalry impact and light cavalry javelin is a little kind of, you know, mini subcommand that if someone's busy with the knights, that can whiz off on its own and do things, or it can operate as the gap filler or the overlap provider. And then I've gone for a couple of the heavy spearmen support mediocre, same as you, and a light infantry bow, again as a second block to support the knights on either side. And I think this is one of the opportunities where I think this new move 3 or 3 MU move for heavy infantry's got a little bit of potential to change how these lists play slightly. It would just, particularly with the strategist in that command, even if that functions as 3 groups, it's still, it can move up a bit more quickly than it used to be able to. Or if it functions as 2 groups, more likely 6 mounted and 2 spearmen, the strategist can really get that forward. And part of this is that with the number of light horse and light infantry that I've squeezed in, I've managed to be able to get the initiative up to 4, which is starting to get in the we're going first and here we come, which and I wonder to get advantage of that heavy spearman, heavy infantry 3 MU move, whether you do need to be getting the initiative and getting on the front foot as well. So it's got some of those same components but arranged differently. And then in the second command, which is the one with the competent general, this is again my kind of mixed command. So I've got 2 light cavalry javelin, 2 medium cavalry javelin in there. I think you had 3 and 1 in your command, Richard. I've gone 2 and 2. Still slightly unsure how the medium cavalry javelin will work. And then I've actually, again, maybe this is trying too hard to take advantage of that that heavy infantry move. But again, I'm wondering, with 2 medium spearmen, 2 light infantry with javelin, a crossbowman, a bowman, bowman's mediocre in that 2-pack, and then 2 more of the heavy spearman support. I'm kind of seeing that one of the challenges that sometimes you used to get with just all medium foot commands is defending their flank that's in the open. They're fine in terrain, but sometimes they just lose a little bit of grunt. So being able to move heavy spearmen up into position with medium spearmen and bowmen, they can kind of sit on slightly smaller bits of terrain get there a bit more quickly, and work together in that sort of way. There's not quite as much shooting as you. There's not really a javelinman there. And then the final command, which is one of these kind of do nothing but occupy space commands, but still be quite threatening. And this could either act in support of the knights, or it could act in support of the medium infantry on the other side of a bit of terrain if they're contesting terrain in the middle. You've got a couple of impact cavalry, one heavy, one medium, an included general, and a couple of light cavalry javelin. It's only 27 points. It's an ordinary included general, but it does have 2 impact cavalry in it and 2 light cavalry javelin. And that's, I think, Dave, you call this kind of a dicky. It's a dicky about command, but with a bit of teeth, possibly. And and I think there's an argument to swap the medium cavalry javelin over into this command and put the impacts in the middle, but I don't know. I think with an initiative of 4, you kind of want to be getting out wide and putting pressure on the flanks and the light horse and the rest of it that makes up the extremities of some of these other commands. To really, there's a lot of things in here to distract people, to keep them busy, which whilst you are just throwing those 4 impact knights under the command of the strategist at them pretty hard. So I think there's a bit about the phasing of how this army will come into contact with the enemy, that this last command is a bit unusual, but by the time it starts moving, and with initiative of 4, hopefully it's all going first, the enemy's already dealing with quite a lot of different things by the time this thing actually starts moving up and getting into the game, and then it's an extra threat kind of arriving later. So it's trying to give a bit of a different flavor to it, but still at 25 and with a strategist and with the 4 knights as the Schwerpunkt, which is not particularly Spanish, but doing it in a kind of differently mixed up way.
So I like what you've done. I mean, I think if one compared your list to mine, probably at a raw troop level, it's probably 85% the same or 90% the same, but you've obviously organized the commands quite differently. I think the big advantage of having the knights under the strategist, as you say, is you can use them more perhaps as individuals, should you so wish, rather than in a group. I think getting the initiative of 4 and being able to throw forward that small command 3 and rush ahead your heavy spearmen are all very good things. The one thing,
actually, what this was just it was one of the things I was looking at, with my V4 head on, if that makes sense.
I think
using it was using the light infantry. So there's 3 light infantry and 5 light cavalry to get up to that magic 6, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, and I think certainly let's face it, the first 6-12 months that we play, people will still be getting used to some of the changes. So forcing yourself to take advantage of those changes and therefore learn the strengths and weaknesses of them is got to be a good thing. The one potential negative I see is that if the small command is on the outside of the knight command, the command 2 has got 12 people in it under a competent general. All of the mounted aren't really stand and fight. So if somebody pressures that, you've got a lot of frontage to control with a competent general. And if you start to get into trouble, some of them may be evading you. I don't know. It just feels that that's where your opponent is going to be looking to pressure you. And if you put the four mini command guys on their outside, then maybe that leaves the knight command a bit exposed on its flank. So, I think those are minor quibbles in what is going to give anybody a hard time.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, and perhaps this is again me over relying on the magic V4 changes or whatever, and thinking, will these spearmen, these 2 blocks of two supported spearmen, in my mind, those are now magically getting into position much quicker. And then I'm kind of forgetting about them. They're there. They become little lumps of tough to beat terrain that soak up some of the enemy's good stuff whilst you try and force around it. So I think, as I said when I was talking about, I think there is an argument to put the medium cavalry javelin from the central command into the smaller dicky about command, but whether that then makes it a bit less flavoursome of Arabic, being forced to have some strike troops in that little command is something quite different. But it's a good reminder that the fact that that ADLG is a game where you have to put command structures in means you have to come up with a way of playing and a plan. As we said, I suspect this is 80-90% exactly the same troops as you've got, but this army would play quite differently just because of the way it's been screwed together. And,
yes,
and you'd have to play it quite differently, which is great, really, because it means you've got to start with a plan. You're not just going, I'll just pick a load of good troops and shuffle them as they are. So, Dave, what's your thoughts on this one?
I look at the initiative of 4 is really impressive, isn't it? And I like the small dicking about command. I mean, if you put that, it seems like you're going to win the initiative. You're going to get a good look at the opponent's army. You put down your 3rd command, which is only 4 bases and 27 points. You're going to get a very good look at where your enemy is. And that micro command can then shoot off to where it's needed. And I would imagine it shooting around the table to support the medium Christian Knights than Impact Elites. I agree with Richard. Command 2's got a lot to do, but as we've said before, you've got 3 initiative, 3 command points in this army. Somewhere you're going to have a lot of troops with a general who's got a lot to do.
And I suppose it's a toss-up with that 3 and using the strategist. You could swap the strategist and the competent over, but whether then the aim is to get those knights where they need to be, and is it a better choice to have the strategist? This is initiative 4, get everybody in your face, and then let's see what happens. You could put the strategist in the second one because it is going to need more stuff doing to it, but then you're using the strategist to pull the stops in the organ and play all the keys and move his leg over to press the C sharp flat or whatever it is, in a terrible non-Spanish metaphor. But he's juggling all the tapas plates at the same time and cooking some octopus.
I think the one thing I would do is probably move 2 of the medium infantry command 2 into with the strategist, just to run out and I think do my favourite. You could maybe move the bowman out to do my favourite trick of supporting the knights, or even the 2 medium spearmen to move there. And then you've got
too much, because if you take them out, then if you take anything out of that central command, it becomes a bit nothingy. I don't know. It's a tough one, really. But yeah, it's playing with one hand tied behind your back because of that command structure, which is one of the great joys of this as well.
As we've said, you've always got to do that, and I think what you've got to do is decide what's your playing style, and therefore where do you want to concentrate your strength and where do you want to have your weakness, know it's a weakness, and deploy with that in mind. I mean,
100%.
True. Good. Okay. Well, interesting. Well, let's move on to the third one then.
This means war.
So look, let's come back to our third and final list 204 Taifa Kingdoms, and this is Dave's. And Dave, I know that you're a big fan of Almugavars. I think you're probably going to wax lyrical about the Almugavar figures that you've got from, I suspect, Eureka later on in the podcast. So I'm guessing this is a Murcia list because that's the option that's allowed the Almugavars. And indeed, yes, it is. And you've gone 26. You managed to get 26. Perhaps that's not having the strategist. He's not allowed to command these guys. But talk us through your 2 initiative, half-hearted, I've got to say, with 8, 10, and 8, which is a pretty even spread, and competent, brilliant, and ordinary, unreliable. But run us through it. How have you put together this Murcia list?
Okay, so knowing you two were going El Cid, I thought I'd do something different. As you say, this is Murcia, a different one. What I've tried to do is, as an experiment, I've tried to cut and paste across what I often use in my feudal Spanish or medieval Spanish army, and see what it how far I can mirror it in this list. So that kind of works to some degree. It's a much larger one. So command 1, 4 medium knight impetuous. In my other ones, they'd be elite. So the Murcia list allows you to have 6 knights, but it doesn't allow you to have any impact cavalry. So I thought, right, let's go for all 6 knights. So command 1, 4 knights, and the 2 medium cavalry javelin and 2 light horse javelin, which are compulsory. I've given them a competent general. I've not included him for a reason. Yeah. So what I'm hoping there is I've got enough pips, hopefully, with that competent general to move them as 2 different groups. I'm figuring what I would probably do is move the Berber horse onto a flank, push them forward to bring an enemy onto me so that my knights can get into them. And if somebody doesn't face up to the knights and retreats away, then I've got them on the back foot and I can keep pressurizing them. And I've got movement of 4, movement of 3 there. So that's that command. What I often do with the feudal, medieval, and the in version 3 is I have a brilliant commander in the centre with more to do, and he's commanding essentially a medium infantry force and 2 knights. In the medieval, in the feudal, the Spanish list, those knights are military orders, so they're impact. I'm going to have a bit of problem controlling the knights in this central command, but they are there to try and work. So what they're going to do is, if the opportunity is there, they're going to help concentrate 6 knights with the cavalry. So you've got an overwhelming cavalry form. If you can't do that and you have to move them out to one side, you may decide the brilliant general is going to be moving the infantry as a separate group. What I like to do is try and maneuver out either the 2 crossbowmen out to a flank, or if the terrain works, I'll go through the terrain with the almugavars, the javelinmen, and the crossbowmen, and the bowmen, which is 6 wide. You've got some very good almugavars. The javelinmen can work. I'm hoping to stay wider. That works very well with this army.
And I guess there's the opportunity for more terrain to be in the middle of the field now, in some ways, because of the slight tweaks to the terrain rules that we're aware of as well. So, we've all gone for more mediums. Okay, there's a lot of mediums in this, but I suspect they will. Well, the ability to just ignore terrain is not going to be as straightforward as it was. There's probably going to need to be more to take it on. Yeah,
exactly. And command 3, he's the ordinary general, and he's unreliable, just to save a few points. This is something I've learned to do with the other lists again, and I wanted to mirror again. This command in my version 3 armies would be much, much smaller. It wouldn't be 8, it would be probably 6 at most. But because you've got to, in effect, with the Murcian list, have 4 spearmen, that's a spear command. If it's reliable, it marches forward as fast as it can in support of the knights. And it's got enough width in itself to have a medium infantry combination in there as well. I haven't gone with the support. I couldn't afford it. Yeah. I could have sacrificed a crossbowman or a bowman to bring some things like that in, but I do like to have my crossbow and mediocre.
You do, bowman. Yeah.
And I feel like that's such a good thing. I don't want to sacrifice that, but yeah.
Yeah, it's still big. Richard, what's your thoughts looking at this one?
Well, I think it's interesting by its, as we've said before, all of these lists are pretty large for medieval lists, which is very, very interesting. And they do that by perhaps having a few more mediocre troops, which I think we all feel for some of the tweaks will just perhaps make them a bit more viable. I like the mediocre bowman with another bowman idea, but I prefer it when it's on the flanks rather than in the middle, because I just think it's a bit less vulnerable. I think I think Command 1 is great. I can see that really being useful on a flank. I can see Command 2 being handy, but if there isn't terrain in the middle, I can see it having a challenge. And the only thing with Command 3 is having no mounted at all and having relatively weak shooting. If it's on a flank, then somebody is going to try and pick on that. But equally, if they're going to pick on that, it allows Dave to use his other 2 commands to beat up where the enemy's weakened himself, to have a go at Command 3.
That's exactly my plan.
Yeah.
Command 3 sits a third of the way in from one side of the table and is there to provide a target, whilst the other third of the table is concentrated with knights and fast-moving troops to support them, which rush forward. The idea of Command 3 is to die slowly and have some troops that can dick about and push round and move quickly to cause problems and try and save themselves. Though in my normal command, it would be just 2 or 3 spearmen whose job is to die whilst everybody runs away, whilst the knights win me the game. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Yeah, no, it's interesting trying to look at that Command 3 as saying its battlefield role is to be a target, whereas normally I would look at a block of spearmen and bowmen and saying this is supposed to be something that throws itself forward and becomes a block on the enemy and a kind of pseudo terrain piece. But you're actually almost happy to see this one go down, because the ability to have 6 knights plus all that other stuff, the medium cavalry, the fast moving Almugavars, the other shooting, pick on the rest of the enemy army that's not taking over these 8. And I guess with 8, it's going to be a while before they're not all going to get wiped out, are they? You're going to lose 10, 12, even if they absolutely got hammered out of that command, and you've got 26 to play with, so you still can take a lot of damage on the other 2 commands, even if that 3rd command is almost wiped out to a man.
I think what probably happens is something from Command 2. I mean, hopefully I'm going to have enough pips. Is either the crossbowmen or the javelinmen will manoeuvre out around the knights to support them on the flank and give them that width, whilst I try and use my pips from the brilliant general with the knights. And the thing I find with the Almugavars is don't use them in a main fighting troop. Have them follow along behind the knights to make, use their speed to get around the back of things. If you can pin somebody with a spearman, then get an Almugavar past them and work the flanks, that's the way Almugavars worked at the time. And I think it's something I've learned with these Spanish lists.
Is to use them properly.
Infantry to get into the flanks. That's what I want to do.
One thing, just looking at this list and seeing this composition, and again trying to put my V4 head on, not my V4 head, my version 4 head on, otherwise some strange rimmer tattoo on there. But that block of 2 medium cavalry javelin and 2 light cavalry javelin, it was just, I kind of got a picture about how much better it would be to be medium cavalry javelin and light cavalry javelin than medium cavalry, and that extra shooting that it gives you, even if it's pretty paltry. We look at medium cavalry and go, they're a bit rubbish, or they're not as good as knights, which is still true. And the javelin isn't going to fix that, but it is going to make them very, very dangerous to enemy light horse who, beforehand, if you were sat there with a row of light horse bow, you could think to yourself, well, I'll let the enemy medium cavalry come up and I'll shoot them and then I'll evade away and I'll be fine. But if the medium cavalry can suddenly shoot, even if it's only at 1, they're shooting not as light troops, they're shooting as normal troops. They could actually...
They must be pretty good because they're 2 points more than the light cavalry. So I assume they're shooting...
Well, no, but they've got more hit points and they fight at better factors and things. But assuming they're normal medium cavalry, the same as bow, they'll shoot at a base factor of 0 instead of -1 for light cavalry. But suddenly that's a real block of stuff that bullies anyone else's lights a lot more effectively than if it was just 2 normal medium cavalry and 2 light cavalry javelin, just because they're getting twice as much shooting and it's more effective if they get close.
Yeah, I think the difference is, whereas before you would always charge the lights with the medium cavalry, now you can ride up to half a UD and chuck your javelins. The disadvantage is you still got protection of 0, so it's kind of an even shooting fight. But where I also think they'll be very useful is against medium spear and medium swordsmen hugging the edge of terrain, because now you can come up, stand outside the terrain and chuck stuff at them the way medium bow used to be able to do. And I think that's quite good, because it stops this idea of terrain forts being quite so prevalent, which is annoying, because I don't think it's that historical.
Yeah, the terrain would kind of, blend in from good to bad, wouldn't it? It wouldn't be a straight, this is good, and if you step 3 paces to the right, it's bad. So this gives more cavalry an ability to reach in and touch people when they're lurking in terrain.
Yeah, because very few actual battle accounts say, and in the middle of the battlefield was a convenient field, and the archers stood in the field and couldn't be touched by the enemy cavalry.
Exactly. No, I don't remember that happening very often, except in the English Civil War, probably. But then they weren't archers; they were, they're always dragoons. That's what dragoons do. Okay, then. Well, look, let's covered off 3 ways of putting these lists together, all similar sizes, but really interestingly different ways of dropping the troops into the 3 different commands to come up with sort of quite different play styles and things. And I think all of them just feel very interesting lists to try and drop on the table against a more traditional, feudal, medieval, knighty and speary army of a 20, 21, 22 as well, because they do bring quite a lot of different things to the table to give you some different paper, scissors, stone in northern and southern Spain in this period.
This means war.
Well, look, we've talked about the lists here, and as we always do, is round this off with looking at what figures you can buy, particularly in 15 mil. Well, I suppose there's other scales as well where we've started to get these sorts of things now, and I think this is all about 2 things really. It's the time period from 1072 to 1172 or something, 1030 to 1170, and then the other question, sort of whether the Andalusian Spanish style was particularly different. And then, Dave, do you want to just kick us off by telling us how good the Eureka Almogavars are?
Well, I've just painted up a Legio Heroica army for to replace, to be a specific feudal Spanish or medieval Spanish army. It's not quite accurate. I've done it. I want it to be sort of 12th century or 13th century, 1250, around there. So I've given them the what's with the knights. I think Essex do a Spanish knights. If you look in the WRG books, the feudal Europe army, the medieval Spanish knights are very different. They were lighter. They wore scale. They wore silk over it, long silk covers. They had a shield which is very different. It's rounded at the bottom, straight across the top, and they didn't wear a heavy helmet. They just wore a rounded cap. So I think because they were fighting more lighter cavalry in their surrounding, were chasing around a lot more. They were slightly lighter arms. It'd be really nice to see a figure made for that specific figure. But for these figures, I'd go Legio Heroica, because the spearmen are perfect. And you've got the Arab spearmen, very much so. And as you say, Eureka makes the only sort of Almogavar. And scale-wise, that really works very well with the Legio.
The Legio ones. What about the Donington? Because the Donington's got a nice range of Arabs and also sort of feudal knights as well, I guess. And that's quite a new range that's come out.
Yeah, I mean, I I used Donington for all my medievals when I began, but then I bought a lot of Legio Heroica Arabs, which are very beautiful figures. So
they're such sharp casts, the Legio Heroica, aren't they? Every now and then I find one that's unpainted, and you're just like, wow, this actually is. It's a bit of a fiddle putting on the separate spears and shields, but once you've got your head around that, they're such sharp castings.
Spears are a bit awkward; they don't quite stick in hand, but
yeah,
that can be surmounted. They ping off a bit, to use a technical.
What about the? Is there any figures for this? Because the Dark Age, Dark Age, almost early feudal version of Forged in Battle has come out, because they're certainly doing Normans and Crusaders and things like that. Do they quite reach into this period or not yet?
No,
a little bit short.
Well, I think if you're doing up to El Cid rather than the 12th century ones, then those First Crusade figures work fine. As Dave said, a lot of the Spanish knights wore the sort of nasal Norman helm up until 1200 or beyond. So I think if in doubt for El Cid, use Normans rather than and the First Crusade type figures.
And I think from my point of view, it wouldn't be if in doubt. It would be I will be using Normans, because I've got a load of Two Dragons Normans that I've just rebased and tarted up. I think, in fact, I did them just after all on our other podcast group. We were talking about the El Cid film, which was on earlier this year, I think, the Charlton Heston version. I think we were all watching it at the same time. And so I've even painted up a few of the shields with the Valencia imagery from that particular film. I don't think any of my guys look particularly like Charlton Heston. They're all Two Dragons, so they've got those little round chubby comedy faces, but the rest of them look kind of vaguely Spanish, and there are some Valencian ones in there, and they're lovely figures.
There are some early, I think late 11th, early 12th century command figures that various people do, where they have the helm that extends down to the neck and comes around the ears, but still has a kind of open face. And I think those probably are quite good for Spanish generals of this period. The other thing, as you say, a number of manufacturers, even at 15 mil, do separate shields. And so you can get a more Spanish feel by putting perhaps some round shields, or as Dave said, if you look in, some of them have heart-shaped shields. I know some of the Essex figures have that. And Essex do specific Spanish knights, which have round shields with the tassels on. And it's not really worth it at 15, but at 28 mil, you can quite easily make a few tassels out of green stuff and just give things a slightly more Spanish feel by doing that.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of good options. I think, just trying to think of some of the other ones that I've seen. I think the Thistle and Rose do some very good sort of quasi-Norman knights as well. And they're just coming back into the market, 15 mil. Just trying to think through some of the other ones. I'm just so stuck on these Two Dragon ones.
There are more and more 28 mil plastic Normans appearing as well. There's 2 or 3 ranges of those.
Yeah, Victrix are coming out with some, and I suspect Victrix are doing separate shields to do a more Spanish style as well. But then you can always swap shields in, can't you?
And Gripping Beast do a lot of Arabs. So I think between the Victrix and Gripping Beast ranges, you could probably do a 28 mil Spanish plastic army, without too much modelling.
In fact, maybe I'd only really need to pick up the knights, because I think I may have enough Arabs in 28 mil from one of my lockdown mega painting sessions last year. So, okay. So look, this is it's something that this list is a split out of a previous list, but it's bringing something kind of new and interesting to it. And I think I don't know about you guys, but what certainly sort of pleased me or surprised me is that we've found ways to use some of the benefits or some of the new changes in version 4 in these lists, but it's not dominating. They're all just like little incremental nice to haves. Can I push the spearman up a bit quicker? I've only got 2 Almogavars. They're not suddenly here's a new troop type that's going to completely change the game balance. And it also seems to be more of not here is a magical new troop type, but more this allows you to play an army with a different style of play, which is kind of good. I guess that's what you want. You don't want, oh, suddenly I've got a Dutch, ditch all the crossbowmen because they're no longer so good, or ditch all the, whatever. This is all, some of the ones that I maybe wouldn't have used, I can use a few more of, and this will allow me to play differently, not with different things.
And I don't quite know all the changes yet, but from what I see, what I've divined is that small tweaks to points cost makes all of the troops closer to identical value for money. I mean, you can never get that perfectly right.
No.
But what it means is we should get more variety of army construction. There'll be less one or two. It was getting to the point where bow impact knights and elephants were dominating most people's army choices. This, I think there's been more heavy infantry, more variety of medium infantry, different forms of lighter cavalry, all of which just make it a more fun game.
Dave, your final thoughts?
I agree with that. I know we're specifically talking about this list and a bit of a sneak preview. There's a lot less elites in this list. I wonder if that flavour is going to be continued into other ones. That's going to be very interesting. One thing I tend to sort of think, and I think this may be even further into the future, is we seem to be negotiating this fundamental issue of what's medium infantry and what's medium and heavy infantry. I think we're gradually moving towards a result on that one where we might end up with troops which have just got a terrain ability, or something like that.
Actually, it's a very good point, because I think online, people will be reading the real rules by the time this comes out, but online, the heavy infantry moving 3 outside, tactical distance was kind of the whoa one, but actually, if you characterize it as what that does is blur the difference between heavy and medium infantry, which actually is something that Wargames rules have actually wanted to do for a long time, because everybody thinks it's kind of right. So if you frame it in that context, that's a really interesting way of looking at it, and it's actually breaking down a completely artificial division to do with how deep a little bit of MDF is between how things function tactically.
It's been an issue that wargamers have always whinged about for many, many years.
Yeah. No, well, look, that's actually probably quite a good point to wrap up on. So I think on that point, we will leave you with our first list, and we will be furiously flicking through the actual book to find some of these more new lists or some of the other change ones, and bring you a load more of these list podcasts in the coming weeks. So thanks for listening.